there, and then I remembered.
It's not gone below the bed.
That's better.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You're what? Yeah.
Still, it's standard specifications reserved.
This could be a good year.
So what I'm wondering, I got a phone call from Kevin about the two projects that he's done.
Well,
He says, man, this is, I don't know if I just know about this thing. And I said, well, just so you know, the road project trumps and we've got it. Did you get the email from Roger Burton? He's been on our case for a while.
basically general provision.
He gets
Right, and I can get there.
Right.
But if I wanted to look at the standard specifications,
Mhm.
Is
right,
that a different one?
down there.
Yeah,
they-
probably,
which
for the
is
same-
mentioned,
How is it copy that now?
Earlier today.
Okay, I just.
It'll be.
I basically just said, please get it done. State Street is priority.
Yeah, and I told him that already, that it is for us to,
the design code, and it says see the appendix, and you can't see this.
anyway.
It also references the SDS.
So yeah, I told this. Number one,
Yeah, you're pretty.
so I just read that, I was on my way back.
And I just printed it out.
And I slept, woke up, immediately thinking about it. And so I called him, or texted him, I said, what if we just, if we went 100% loan, 0 interest on the State Street, what do you, and he's like, it wouldn't even affect anything with that. Because I got thinking, I mean, it's, we have money, we get a loan, we're able to keep that money in our pocket for a lot longer, especially if we get a 0 interest. We get a 0 interest loan on the State Street project, get that done, then we're just paying that payment and not paying any interest. So we still get to keep that in our budget. So, use it for it. And then we can go
During the.
aggressive on to see if we can get loan grant.
We forgot to order pizza.
That's
Credit card was not. That is true.
Worst case scenario. Because if we get State Street, that's the higher priority.
All that. Explain your budget on.
But yeah,
It's the budget, guys, so.
We had to. We got the State Street.
but if we get a 0% loan, like tons of loans, they have tons of money to loan, and it's not gonna affect us. I'm going to- Yeah, I think that's, so I woke up thinking about that, like,
Yeah.
so I asked him, I said, you think that hurts us? That's good.
Anybody else?
So I'd like to be at that meeting.
Yeah,
because I'm pretty passionate about it. And
I talked to Keith and
I know everybody's been
he
involved
didn't
with
think he would
it.
make it
I
today.
feel like I presented pretty good argument for all of that.
Yeah.
Tommy's been there for somewhere, so
that's right.
No, I'll be there.
we don't
I mean, honestly, to me, I can.
he wanted us to.
I'm absolutely willing to.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just wants to report on Zoom link, he never got back to me, so.
Are we ready? Well, I guess it's after 5:30, so we're on more or less standard time.
Go.
Let's go ahead and get our work session going. Start with roll call. John,
Yeah.
Lynn,
Here.
Ren,
Here.
Cody, here, and Steve's here. Let's go over our minutes from our last past meeting. No. Only thing I see, second page should be a capital B for bird. Other than that,
There's also an R or ordinance on the second page too. Mayor Bird recommended examining R.
Oh, okay. There's the plan.
oh yeah, see that?
Who's been here? Who's been here? Actually.
No, we approved here because the rules are we approved in the next meeting.
Even ordinance.
Yeah, we approved these here, right, JR? You approved them in a work meeting, your minutes, don't
You can, yes.
you? Yeah,
As long as you have a quorum.
yeah,
Might as well, then you don't have to.
yeah.
approve
Then
it.
we'll have to go- then we'll have only minutes from this to deal with. So with those two changes, approve the motion to approve with those amendments.
Where is the agenda?
Right there.
Yeah, as long as it's on
Yeah,
the
it's on the
agenda.
agenda.
It's on the agenda.
We have a
I so move.
motion from Ren,
I'll second it.
second from Lynn, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, let's start off with the first item, Title 16, for building standards. Who's gonna,
You ready?
I'm ready, and whoever's gonna take that lead on that discussion.
So we wanted to go over the standard section 16 for a few reasons. There's been some discussion of sidewalk, curb, gutter in our M1 and M2 districts, zones, and what we want to require. Right now, it's a little vague. In fact, it does refer to the city council as approving any, if at all. So,
Yeah, which is a very, no.
yes. So it leaves it case by case. It's a little sticky, a little messy. So we want to clean that up specifically and just have a general discussion on M1, M2 zones. What you guys think? Should we require curb gutter, sidewalk? Is sidewalk necessary in some of those areas? Get your fill on some of that.
So let's talk about the difference between M1 and M2.
So,
And then I'll make a comment when you're done with that. It's light industrial and heavy industrial.
right, so yeah, light industrial, heavy industrial, the difference between the two. So.
When we met with the attorney, when we met with the attorney, we went through, so in Title 16, it says subdivisions. And in Title 16 subdivisions, it spells out curb, gutter, sidewalk, lighting, all of that stuff. But it really is kind of
Residential.
referring to residential. And so we really don't have anything for M1, M2, commercial, or anything like that. But because we're dealing with the M1, M2, we thought, let's handle that first. So I can just tell you, is it okay if I just say what we discussed with the attorney? And then see what you guys' thoughts are. So in discussing it with the attorney, we need to specify each zone and what is required in each zone. And one of the things we talked about in the industrial area, and this is heavy industrial, I think we're in, right, Dean?
Correct.
So currently, we don't have any storm drain. And in the area that we're talking, particularly, if we have Brad put in the retention ponds like we were thinking, they're going to be right behind the airport. And we have a problem with water at the airport anyway. So we put the streets in a curb and gutter, and all of that water gathers through the streets and then ends up in that retention pond. Then we're exacerbating the problem right there at the airport with the water. So one of the things that we talked about is we need to find out what the standard is. what you guys think we ought to do as a standard. And implement that in that zone. And if it's curb and gutter, we need to make sure that we have a storm drain system in place. And to be able to do that, that might take some time. So we had a couple different ideas. One was one of the concerns with putting the curb and gutter in is making sure that we're shoring up the roadside so that it's not getting damaged and sloughing off on the edges. And so we talked about putting in at least a 5-foot shoulder of road base that's compacted next to that so that you don't have that issue. Then we can still make the standards. We can still go through with the standards. And if it's curb and gutter, we can give a variance at this time. But what'll happen is in our master plan for the city, we've identified some areas. Can you pull up the map for the airport?
Just like the GIS?
Yeah. So we've identified some areas where we can actually run the storm drain to. And that could be a project in our master plan. And once the storm drain in, then we can go back and do an assessment area for that whole area and put in curb and gutter, and then it'll connect into the storm drain at that point. So that's kind of the.
And whose expense would that later curb and gutter be?
It's going to be assessment areas. So what it would be is the city would pay for it, but they would put a special assessment in that area so they'd be paid off within a 20-year period or something like that by those owners in that area.
So that would be what attached to their like utility bills?
It would be what it'd be is a property. It comes like a property tax.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, but those are some thoughts, and maybe we don't want curb and gutter. I don't know. Those are just some thoughts that we threw around and said, okay, here's how we can do it. Ultimately, we want to have storm drain, and we want to be able to take care of that water. And we have the gulch that's not too far away. There's a drainage that goes kind of right along, just north of the airport. And so if we can get the storm drain into that drainage in a couple different areas from where Brad's wanting to build clear over the mountain land and north, then we can take care of all of that water and it'll end up in Dry Gulch.
On the drainage, 1606-200 says that a drainage system has to be designed by an engineer and everything.
Yeah.
Of the whole subdivision. And so we just have to decide whether we want those to be done. But even if we don't, say curb and gutter has to be there, Brad still has to, with his development,
Put in
he
storm drain.
still has to have that taken care of, even if he
Yeah.
does it in phases, the whole subdivision would have to be built.
Right, and so what we're thinking, instead of putting curb and gutter in, just put the storm drain in his subdivision. And he could stub it to this area. This second lot right here has a sewer line running, there's an easement for a sewer line right here. And so there's an anticipation that we'd hook onto that storm drain here, take it to this point, parallel that sewer line, and then come on over to this drainage right here. And once it hits that drainage, then it'll make its way to Dry Gulch. And so if you look at all of these streets through here, if we needed to on this side of the 2000 West, we could also do the same thing, which would be a little bit shorter, but storm drain in that area as well. And once we get that, then we can start putting curb and gutter in all of these streets that we already have. And then we'd have something that for future expansion, future growth, when people are developing, they tie into the storm drain, put in curb and gutter. And it's all, and because that water, that area is it's high water table. So that was the thought. So we wouldn't have to do retention ponds, which would save them some money and space, because we don't want the water sitting there anyway. We want it gone.
Well, with that though, won't he have to develop his properties and bring that storm water to the road area to bring it to there?
So the design that we got is just drainage of the road.
Yeah,
So he would still be responsible to maintain his 5 acre parcels on the drainage.
Stormwater on the parcels.
He would have to maintain his own.
but at least it's not accumulating through the subdivision and going into one spot.
Ponding. Yeah, that makes sense.
So in talking with Jones and the mill, everything is kosher as far as dumping into that drainage if we do have the detention pond. So,
You've got permission from the powers that be that need.
yes. So,
Jim Spencer said we could.
yeah, maybe Jim gave us the greens.
I'm just.
Freaking liar.
So,
But you're asking a biologist about drainage? That's mistake. number
Wetland.
one.
He said it's wetland.
Mistake number one.
No, but, so it would be designed as part of the master plan. And it might take us, a year or two to get that developed and in. But at least it would be on our radar.
So you want to 5 foot shoulders if we choose no curb?
That's up to you guys. That was a suggestion.
Standard is 10.
That's without curb and gutter. What he's talking about is having a curb and gutter.
No,
Oh, you're talking about
we,
a
we,
semi-compacted?
we thought about amending that. It's hard because if you look at, I don't know, we talked about, and what is reasonable, and 10 seems unreasonable. 5 seems more reasonable. Go ahead, Dean.
I've given this 10-foot shoulder some thought. And basically that road down there would not be residential, they would be which would be 66 feet wide. Now, if you have a 10-foot shoulder, basically the road would be 46. And your 10-foot shoulder, you've got 2 feet for the curb, depending on whether it's a 4-foot sidewalk. So if you've got a 10-foot shoulder, you've actually got the road right away. Kind of wondering if why they didn't specify 10 feet, because it's actually encompassing your right of way
And your,
and maintaining that for future whatever. And I'm wondering if that's rather than 5, is that why they didn't come up with 10 on each side? Because it's maintaining the right of way of the road.
Yeah.
Because it got 46, you get 10 and 10, and 66 is what that road right of way was.
and I think we could maintain the right of way. That, what I'm looking at is what would be required as far as, infrastructure or, aggregate and compaction. And I look at some of these roads around, like the old highway. That one bothers me just because the shoulders are so narrow. And
There's a shoulder.
yeah, exactly. And even past that, the dirt doesn't move, but it's holding up. Whatever they've done, it's holding up just fine. And so whatever happens, as long as there's some compaction and some shoulder that goes past it, I think we'd be okay. But these are just suggestions. You guys are the ones that really. Cody, what have you seen in the county?
So you've seen them on Highway 40 just outside of mine right now, working on that shoulder. And there's not 10 feet there,
Right.
and it's just fine.
And I wonder what they're doing, and that may be more of it than anything is having it to where, what compaction is it and all of that, you know what I mean? Because I think
So
that's
you
gonna
can definitely do what we're trying to achieve with 5 feet, as long as it's done the right way.
And I think that would be where the engineer, we would need to get their recommendations as far as compaction goes, if we're gonna go to 5.
Have we asked the engineer what they would suggest on a road like that and how wide the shoulder should be?
Not on the shoulder, but on thickness of concrete, or of asphalt and of aggregate. We did get a UDOT standard, basically. We were talking about that the other day.
Yeah,
So Ben Henderson, they are actually 8 inches in the county, but in talking.
of asphalt
Yes. But in
or
talking-
aggregate?
Of asphalt, 6 of aggregate. But he agreed that 6 of asphalt would be sufficient. 8 is a little overkill. They said by the time they build that up, you're to the skies.
That's like a freeway
Right.
spec.
So we were recommending 6 inches of asphalt with 6 of aggregate. But the compaction on the shoulder, we didn't pin the engineer down, but we can.
I wonder if we do that, what do you guys think? If we got the engineer involved and just said, okay, what is needed on that?
I'd say the compaction on the shoulder would be same as the road.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what's required, before they put the asphalt over. If I'm guessing, but getting their recommendation would be good.
Yeah.
My concern with the location is that they'll use the shoulder as parking. if it ends up being like a trucking facility, they'll use this edge of the road for parking and stuff.
Yeah.
And then you may want that wider shoulder rather than the narrow private shoulder.
Will they be using it for parking or will they be pulling into the lot?
I think,
I mean,
I
they should
would
be.
think pulling in.
They should
The lot would be
It'd be
fenced.
better to keep them off the road.
And that's what I was gonna say, you bring up a good point, because I go through neighborhoods and I see people parking on the street a lot,
Yeah.
and they shouldn't be, and I've wondered about asking you guys that too. I think we have an ordinance that,
We do.
that they shouldn't be parking.
We have it, but usually it's only enforced when it snows, pretty
Yeah,
much, but it does say, whenever you develop properties and everything, they're supposed to have the off-street parking.
yeah,
But it's kind of interpreted, I think, by the public as, well, when the snow's there, but they still park on the street.
I wonder, Ren, if we look at the current ordinances and see if it addresses that, because I think it probably does, and then that's just an enforcement issue.
Right.
Actually, I think the off-street parking, one thing, there's actually a section for it, but it might be included in this design standards too.
Oh, I do have that, yeah.
The other question is whether or not we need 5 foot or 10 foot is, there may be an infiltration issue that you want 10 foot for the water to actually infiltrate before it goes onto that property.
Hmm.
Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
so maybe we just have the engineer, what we're trying to do is, and this property may be a little different than some others because of the water table that is there. But we want to try to get a good standard. Maybe this is a little unique because of the water and it maybe has to be designed a little bit different. But as we're talking, thicknesses of roads, widths of shoulders, do we require curb and gutter or not? Do we want to put a storm drain in there or not? And those type of, this is what we're wondering, what you guys think as a standard moving forward.
Right now, the way it's described is the discretion of the council on a lot of this, but it also refers to the engineers. So we don't really have a set standard, and it would be nice to get that integrated.
Yeah, because then an engineer could come and design something
Right,
and
well,
it
we
could be
change.
completely different than the next engineer that comes. And we, at least this way, we could go to the engineer and say, these are our standards. We want to make sure we at least meet this. If it needs to be wider because of certain circumstances, then that's fine or whatever. But this is our minimum standard that we're going to go by.
That covers some of it. What else?
Well, along with that is our different zones for future
Yeah.
topic of discussion. We don't need to talk about it tonight, but just to keep in mind, having design standards for each zone. So it's not left to interpretation. And there are gonna be some scenarios where they're gonna have to maybe a case by case, let the council decide on that, but planning commission.
Yeah, we're looking at commercial zones, looking at a C1 and a C2 in commercial zone. I visited with you about that a while ago.
It might not hurt, like I say, to designate the road size, because it's definitely not residential. It needs to at least move up to a collector size.
And I guess
As a
the
recommended, road in our standards that we go with.
biggest question tonight is, how do you guys feel? Do you have any strong feelings one way or the other? Is there anything that you'd like to see incorporated with this or anything that we're missing before we move forward with the council? Because what'll happen, we'll move forward with council tomorrow, we'll just discuss it, and then it'll come back. I think looking at it, unless we want as much feedback from this group as we can get, then we'll get with the council tomorrow, obviously, meet with the engineers and have the engineers spec it out and kind of give them our ideas of what we're looking at. And then it'll come back for an actual ordinance change, incorporating those things that we discussed. It won't be final, it's just, it'll come back for a public hearing and for you guys to look at it again before it goes on the council.
I for one, have a hard time requiring curb and gutter there when we have all that other industrial property that doesn't have it, goes through to get to the drainage. If we're gonna do it, then we need to start over closer to the drainage and then work that way. And, when he's doing that large of lots, I don't know, if we require curb and gutter, I'm pretty sure it's not gonna be in the city. He's not gonna annex it.
Well,
On that,
But it needs sewer.
It may be in the city
it may
already.
already be in the
so
Oh,
on the state parcel map, it's in the city.
okay.
On our zoning map, it's in the city.
on the state.
And it has a R serial number.
So we're
Yeah.
going to look at,
No.
Works engineering will be the last one we get with to see, but I agree with you, Lynn, that even if he is in the city already, we don't want to stick it to him.
Well, we know people that have been in the city and removed themselves.
Yeah, and we don't want that to happen either.
But now it's $10,000 if they want to do that.
But I think if he would be, if we shorten the road width, or the shoulder width, to make it reasonable, and maybe we get with the engineers, maybe come back and say it only needs to be 3 feet, I don't know, or maybe it needs to be 6 feet.
We'll get their recommendation.
But, if you guys are okay moving forward that way, then we can do that. And,
And inside of that, he will want to make sure he's got a grade for that water to go, and
yeah,
when it gets to a point where we can drain it.
right, and I think, it would be, compared to curb and gutter, I don't know what the cost would be, but if you'd be willing to put in the storm drain through that property while he's,
Yeah,
doing sewer and everything else,
I think that's more reasonable.
then when we come back and we get the infrastructure put in as a city, as part of the master plan, then we do the assessment, special assessment in that area, and then everybody puts in curb and gutter, but that's once all the infrastructure's in and there's somewhere for the water to go.
Yeah,
So are you saying that he would install the storm drains while he's doing this subdivision then? Is that what I heard?
Through his subdivision and at least where we would connect, on 3000 west right there.
Now, the only problem to think about, if he's putting in the storm drains there now, he's gonna have to have some kind of infrastructure so it's not filling with dirt. That's usually what curb gutter and, grates in that do. They
Yeah.
contain the water so you're not moving dirt, filling the storm drain. So
Well-
that's something that we gotta think of. It's gotta be incorporated so we don't end up with a storm drain full of dirt.
What I was wondering is, depending on where he put that, obviously we wouldn't want it under the asphalt, but on one of those shoulders, then,
So he put it in, but you wouldn't be running the water to it until what time the infrastructure's there. Okay, that makes sense.
when he puts this storm drain in, then have we got it, can we connect it so it's connected to something, you can get it out of there? I mean, if it isn't, all it's gonna do is pond.
That's what
Well,
JR
well-
said in time they're gonna work on.
yeah, there
In
wouldn't,
time, but
there wouldn't be anything going into that pipe. It would just be the pipe being put in right now,
okay,
Capped pipe, basically, so
Yeah.
nothing goes into it.
just for future. And then what had
That way you
happened,
don't tear everything up.
right, and then what had happened is, as soon as we worked it into our master plan in the next 2 or so years, then we would tie into his pipe that he has right, it'd end right there on 3000 west. We would take it over on 1600 south, just a little bit to where that sewer line runs north and parallel that sewer line, and then take it out over to the gulch. So then at that time, once we get all that infrastructure, we would look at other areas too, and just make this one project of putting in at least the
so it's a solid pipe, it's
correct.
not a collector pipe.
Exactly.
It's not a French drain, it's a conductor.
Yeah.
Conductor.
And one of the things, go ahead, Drew.
Well, you're probably heading down the same road. But
Mhm.
as far as the water table goes there, this could accomplish a French drain as well as a solid pipe, because 8 South, for example, you know how swampy 8 South used to be. And what happened, they put the sewer line in, lined it with gravel, they didn't fabric or anything, and it drained the cemetery ground, it drained the whole area down there. So in regards to that, that would free up a lot of the water and divert it back down. Follow the drainage line and help drain that area.
Long as the sewer line's got that gravel run all right,
Yes, we'd have to
Yeah.
gravel.
Well, if it gets to a point where it doesn't have that around, it's gonna surface.
And we're working with JUB on the airport right now. we're going over the master plan for the airport as well. And so we'll get with them and, maybe we can have them help. That might be, we might be able to engineer, that storm drain, from that point over to the east side of the airport and include it in the cost that they're already charging us for the airport master plan.
I know Kirby's reached out to Candace. Well, he was supposed to reach out to Candace just to see if it would work and incorporate into the future master plan of the airport.
You mean Kimberly?
Or, yeah, not Candace.
Kimberly?
Candace is
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, Kimberly. And, to see if it would be feasible to work and
Okay.
integrate that in.
Yeah, because if they'll, I don't think it'd cost much more where they're already
Right.
doing that. So that we get that. There's some, two birds with one stone there. And then if we could even just get that section done, that gives us a really good start.
Mhm.
So,
And it might benefit too, I mean, if they, as they extend the ramp and that, you know, cause right now that ramp is going to the middle section of the runway.
mhm.
So as we extend the ramp, you know, over time, that would help give them places to take that water to.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's gonna be a benefit to the last thing we want is to have more water gathering right there behind the airport. And once we complete that, let's start to drain that whole area out. It'd be really good for the airport. It'd be good for
And help everything
things
that's
in the
our
future.
Well, I like that idea.
Growth is coming and, the industrial park is one of those spots. I think I've seen a lot of uptick in requests and I think this is somewhere to focus on our efforts to do it right.
I guess I'm a little unsure whether it makes sense to go through that industrial park, curb and gutter through that. This doesn't, I don't know.
That's a tough one. And, you know, that industrial park is, now just take this with a grain of salt, but for me, it's a little embarrassing that it's like it is in the sense that it's kind of hodgepodged, you know, and we need to get, I don't know, I get several complaints from property owners, oh, well, my road's dirt, when are you guys gonna do something with the dirt? And then I get with Kirby, hey, we need to put something on that. Well, if we do that, then we have to maintain it. It's like, well, okay, but I get it. Anyway, so we have so many roads through there that are just dirt. We really need to start looking at where we're gonna be expanding. There's gonna be more added to it. We don't wanna continue to, in my mind, we don't wanna continue to allow those types of problems to continue to happen, because that just pushes it down the road, and then we're gonna have to do something at some point.
And if we don't get it up front, the citizens of Roosevelt end up having to pay for it. So
Yeah,
I think we need to, you know, have them paved is a really good goal. I'm sure that I agree with Kirby.
and that's okay. I mean, that's why we're here, so.
I think long-term it'll make it better. That's the thing we have to look at is long-term. It'll be beneficial in the long run. It may not, you know, that long run may not be in the next 5 or 10 years, but maybe 15 years before we really see, hey, that really was a good idea that we did that.
One of the things that I can see too, and it's kind of an issue that I have even up in the golf course subdivision, is when you start paving roads and water starts running down those roads, you could potentially be the lot where that river ends up going into. And what happened up at my place on the golf course is my neighbor had cut down the curb and was allowing the water that accumulated through all the neighborhoods coming down to go right next to my home. And so it was flooding my basement. And so I talked to Roger Eschler and I said, man, well, what had happened is he went in and put a French drain because all the water was coming in, and he's lower than everywhere else. And so instead of fixing the problem, all that water's running in. And so we also need to think about that as we're paving these roads. Somebody's gonna get stuck with quite a bit of water that they're having to deal with. And, or maybe several people, and then how do we fix those? But what we can do though, like, cause I understand what you're saying too, and we don't wanna make it so expensive that people don't want to develop in Roosevelt City. But at the same time, having had that problem, to me, that curb and gutter could be
It actually caused the problem, is what you're saying, the curb and gutter.
no, it was the lack thereof.
Well, they cut off the curb.
Yeah, exactly.
Curb and gutter collected it, and then there wasn't one.
Yeah.
But
Well, and the other thing to think of too is, once you go to 2000, which is the road that goes 40 across, and this 1600 road, if you go here, this is a dirt road at this time.
Yeah.
But if you look at all this is all heavy truck.
Yeah.
It's all semi and pups and that. And as we get here, as this gets more industrial, this is gonna be semi and pups. So you gotta also think of the heavy traffic, because it's just not light stuff. That's why we're.
I think there's two roads. There's one that, so
It's
somebody,
not paved. I'm gonna say, I think this one here,
we have
I
this
know
one.
this one here is not.
I had the property owner come to me the other day and say, how come that's not paved? And the road, I mean, it's just rutted out and it's got big pothole things. And
Yeah. And
this one's the same,
this
and
one.
then, yeah, and you kind of scroll to the east, and then you have this one, and it's just that,
I think that it should be a goal right away to start to get a plan to figure out how we're gonna do that. 'Cause that paved road is important in those areas.
I don't know if you guys are aware, but these are state lands that are up for auction right now.
yeah, I heard about that. Actually, your son told me.
Actually, I called and talked to them about what infrastructure was available.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we're meeting tonight, is so we don't end up to see this, it was in our standards to have paved roads. The developer was to pave them, it didn't happen, and now here we are.
And part of that is because the council, because it says in the ordinance, and that is,
So that's what we want you guys to determine, so we don't end up with this in 20 more years. Even more of it.
let's try to take care of it now. Let's try not to put too much burden on Brad. Let's try to make it fair for him, but at the same time, try to figure out a way to get our industrial area up to a minimum standard.
Want me to go back to that airport?
That looks good. Thank you.
I think if he has that, if he puts that drain, so we've got that pipe through it, wherever we've got it going, and then we have a good shoulder, then we have, a good paved road. So I think that's, for me, that's.
And I'm even questioning the 6-inch though. I'm like,
Well, you got them big heavy trucks.
that's true.
Take us back to that parcel, if you will.
Yeah. And that, if it is, that's what it is.
6 is what they Kirby and Ben discussed, and they thought
Ben-
Henderson was the county.
Okay.
And just something, nope, gotta come this way, because this is his parcel right here. Now, in his proposal, he wanted a cul-de-sac. Well, if you read our cul-de-sacs, it says maximum 450 feet. One is a city we're trying to get away from cul-de-sacs. So we really need this to come in and dump out here on pole
I think
line.
he's agreed to do that, right?
It's been thrown at him, but there's no agreement.
We haven't got his.
We haven't even talked to him.
But we
Well,
did tell him
if
that.
that's over 400 feet,
He's gonna.
then you can't,
Right.
then we just follow the ordinance. That's why.
Correct. Correct. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was, his preliminary design was to have 450.
Who owns the ground?
Well, he wanted to go 1,500 feet.
On this side,
Yeah.
It's Jessen,
Justin,
and welding service.
I can't remember his first name.
Kevin
Kevin Jessen.
Jessen, he's got a welding company out of Altona.
We talked about that, I mean, maybe having Brad get with him and stubbing a road through him, but he's fabbed a fence up already and everything.
Now, here's the thought. And I wonder how he'd react to this, because I know part of the master plan, we want to acquire a little bit more property to the south of the airport to kind of straighten that line and parallel it with the taxiway, if that makes sense. And so there may be some negotiation we could have with Brad and
How far does Brad own there?
that whole square.
He owns 60
Right
acres.
there, yeah.
But what our future plan for the airport would be to try to get a little bit more property here
Yeah.
and keep this line kind of parallel with the airport to protect that and also give us options for future expansion for hangar space. So I know that's part of the master plan, but maybe maybe this is one of those things that, you know,
Are you talking about dumping the road on to that property if there's an agreement and bringing it back through the airport? Because I don't think that's what we want.
no, what I'm thinking is if he would be willing to participate with the city in that, then maybe and this is something we can negotiate just as a council, but maybe we look at covering the cost of the storm drain or the pipe through there. Does that make sense, or something like that?
So we're not talking about the road,
No.
we're still talking storm.
Yeah, I'm just thinking future.
I do know talking with Kimberly, she was going, oh, who owns that? Because I did know that was something they wanted to do before this all transpired.
So is everybody okay with moving that direction? Any strong feelings one way or the other?
I'm still curious to see what the final plans would look like and how he's gonna deal with the drainage and all of that.
I'm curious too with that natural drainage that runs through there.
It'll have to go through you guys as far as the plan goes for approval.
I mean, how he's gonna deal with all of that.
Because these lots on the west side, once that road goes in, and that road's quite a bit higher than that, unless there's some type of that's gonna be an interesting,
I mean, I guess you could put a culvert through there so that can continue to drain.
but then it drains into the neighbor's lot, and technically legally, ordinance says you have to contain the water on your own property. So that's gonna be an interesting,
And so you're aware, he's removed all 60 acres of vegetation. It's now got sand that deep on the airport ramp.
that's fun, been a mess.
And that they were saying, especially around the fuel station, that last storm, before one time, it actually covered Polling Road. I had a truck ahead of me, he disappeared. I turned around because I didn't want to fill my air filter with that much dirt. But the other day when it was blowing from the southwest, it actually had the whole airport. And Clyde was saying all around the fuel tank, it was quite heavy. We might have to get the sweeper out there.
I wonder if we just ask him to go and with the water truck and spray that.
If he could water it down and get it crusted, it would really help.
Wouldn't cost too much. I bet he knows somebody who could do that very cheap.
I don't know what his plans originally. Originally, he was just talking when he first came to us, this corner parcel. He had a person who was interested in this first 5 acres that wanted this built on.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why he decided to take it all, until he developed sections. But anyway, this parcel here he wanted to develop for sure on that, but a little water would really help. And actually,
Does he have
if
a,
it's in the city construction, we can require dust control down the road.
does he have an engineer working on his?
Yes.
Well, he's talked to Ryan already,
Well,
right?
Ryan Allred's helping us surveying, but Ryan mentioned they were gonna have to get this.
Yeah, they'll have to have an
That's what I
engineer.
was gonna say, and so maybe we
Come
can
in
keep
before it's
in
all
close communication with engineers and ours to, like Ren said, just see how
Definitely.
we're gonna deal with that.
And it's gotta come to zoning for approval anyway.
So from staff, just the items that we need to work on is the engineering on the shoulder of the road, see if we can maintain a 5 foot with the compaction. And-
Or what the minimum
Or what the
would be.
minimum would be.
Yeah. What recommendations do you want to go to council?
And I'll
for them to
follow up with
consider?
Kirby on Kimberly's.
At this point, I don't even know that it needs to go to council because this group, I think, can figure out most between the engineer and then coming back to this group again. Council are just going,
Just information.
Yeah, I mean, unless we want some opinions from council as well, but I feel like this would,
Well, I'm thinking, isn't this something we're trying to put in the ordinance?
it is.
And that, so we gotta get something on paper almost.
Well, until we get the engineering.
Yeah.
Right, that's why I say, until we get the engineering suggestions and things like that, once we, we wanna make sure that everybody here is okay with that. Get the engineer's input from that, and then I think you could go to council. To go to council right now, I think it would just, I think these guys are better suited for that.
Do we,
Waste time.
do we need to do something to appease Brad in the meantime?
I think if we tell him what direction we're going, what we discussed tonight, I think, because I think that's a pretty straightforward, I mean, I'm pretty confident that what you guys have suggested, what we're learning, and what the engineers are gonna suggest, it's pretty much our answer to Brad. I mean, it's not 100% final, but I don't think it's gonna change much.
Right. And the biggest thing was the annexation process. That's why we were trying to hurry this along, go to council and get an answer for Brad, but in light of what we found, that's.
He's already in.
That'll free up months of.
Doesn't matter.
Well, he's already in, and based on this conversation tonight, we can kind of tell him, this is what you can anticipate. We're still finalizing and, you know, getting, fine tuning the details, but this is kind of where we're heading, and just see what his response is.
The only other thing, if you're wanting to petition the land swap for the storm drain, that would be something you guys would need to cross.
And I think that's one of those things that would be outside of this meeting.
Right.
That would just be between the council and you know, new staff, council, and him. But yeah. So we could strike up that conversation with him as a side conversation. We say, hey, while you're doing that,
Propose that.
would you be willing, you know, would you have, I mean, it would make those lots maybe 2.5 to 3 acres, 3.5 acres, you know, 4.5 acres. And then,
So do you want me to go back and have Jones and Mill just get a cost estimate in that section, so you got a dollar amount to know what you're negotiating with?
might not hurt.
Because what we have now is the overall project, the whole thing.
Yeah, and then we could go and tell him if it's, depending on what he values his property at, we can say, okay,
Here's what the city would.
here's what the city will do, and then we'll pay you a little more, or we'll do 75%, and you pay 25%, because that's how the land.
I'll work on that.
And I'll get with, maybe I'll get with Nate and get an idea of what the value of that would be as well, just a rough estimate, so we can kind of get an idea.
Now, talking about that land swap, I think we'd have to talk Kimberly, because I think she's only talking like 50 feet along here, isn't she? Because he's talking 5 acre, I mean, reducing to 2.5 or 3, that's what I thought you said there. I don't think that's gonna be acceptable to him, but if we get a 50-foot strip down here,
What
I
I
think
was,
that's what she was needing for this road area, because there's a problem getting past right here.
right, and what I was thinking, Dean, is if we were to get and win the lottery, and he was willing to give us this
Something
chunk.
like that.
This might be a 2.5 to 3 acre piece.
Okay, I see.
This might be 3.5 to 4, and then this 4.5, and then that one 5. Does that make sense?
Okay,
So the
all right.
front of it would still be parallel, but the back of it would just.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking
But
of
she may
road
want
here,
the
not so
whole-
much property.
The whole 5 acre lot to be in, but he can't maybe put something on anyway.
Well, believe it or not, so these lots are 1.5 acre lot, and if you go look, I mean,
That's a big lot.
that's a pretty decent sized lot. So even a 2.5, 3 acre lot, still, you wouldn't have quite as much depth, but it's still you'd have as much or more depth. So, can you click on this right here sometime? This looks about like a 5 acre lot right here. You can just click on that, see what that is.
This one?
Scroll down. Yeah, 5 acres. So that kind of gives you an idea of how big a 5 acre lot is. So if you're sticking that 5 acre lot here and that, so you might have that much of it cut out of there, but I mean, that's still, it'll be a wide lot. Maybe you put two 1.5 acre lots right there.
Yeah.
And sell it for a little more. And still, anyway, but, yeah.
Anything else that needs covered tonight?
Can I make one quick suggestion on here? And maybe this is something for Drew to do to help you guys out as well. As you know, when we look at changing the ordinance, the main thing we need to look at is not an individual. You know, what's the best for the city? I can make a suggestion to have Drew actually do some research, get some draft language, not necessarily draft ordinance, but just language for you guys to look at, to see if he's heading down the right path of what you want. Because as we go to change these ordinances from M1, M2 to more standardize them, I should say, we need to make sure we're looking at it as a lot, not Brad Knight,
Right.
not Drew Eschler, but a lot. And so if I can recommend having Drew do some of that research and getting some language back to you guys just to make sure you feel comfortable with exactly how it'll be worded.
That's a good idea, and I think we can look at Maples and Bernal,
Mhm.
and then shoot Richfield or, you know, some of the other areas. They're kind of low like us, but close.
And bring that back and you guys can tweak it how you want.
And maybe it's completely different than what we mentioned tonight, but maybe I think it's probably pretty close to where we're at.
Perfect.
And the county is no help.
Wild West.
I'm just
Curb and gutter, what's that?
If someone tell me there's a subdivision going in of Duchesne, isn't it? I mean, minimum. No curb and gutter, I don't even know if it's paved streets.
Oh, there's no paved street. You mean up on the bench?
Yeah.
Oh, there's.
So I sold it like an idiot. Behind Paragon, I owned the 25 acres that are back there. Prime time, commercial property, and I'm immediate. But I went to the county to see what it'd take to develop it. And Mike did tell me, he says, you just have to make sure that your road width is adequate and meets our standard. But you could start out with a gravel road. And I thought,
No.
Isn't it 66 feet?
I do know they made
County roads
that,
are 66 feet.
shaded feather one that Lance Denver's doing, on pole line there, is
Mhm.
down from there.
Right.
They made him pave it and put culverts in at every single driveway. He was upset about that, but I don't believe they made him put curb and gutter in there,
No.
so.
But at least, so, one, it's residential, two,
How
at
long
least
is
they
it?
have,
1 acre lot.
Are they one?
are they one?
Yeah, they're just 1 acre, to guess.
That's your bare minimum.
I know there's
to
a
get
couple of
septic.
it that are in the back that are a little bigger.
Yeah, because of the pie shape.
But at least though, there's somewhere for the water to go. So as it runs off that road, once you pay that road and it runs off, at least he's got some type of a ditch and culverts
And
that
that's what they
carry
did.
that water
They crown that, and they're getting rid of all that.
to the north, probably to the ditch to the
Yeah.
north.
The one that got me though is the off of State Street, his approach off of State Street, they made him put a culvert. There's no bar ditch at all, now it's filled in with sand.
Dude, the road department makes people put culverts everywhere.
Yes.
Hey, I put a culvert in. I didn't get permission, but I put one in.
So you're good to go then.
Just because I looked at it and went, I'm gonna put a culvert in. I don't want that to wash out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not gonna tell you where it is. Yeah.
I won't be looking for it.
You know,
Just the last item on the agenda, just the consideration of.
Yeah, so I guess just for future discussion, we just seeing what thoughts are on separating all the requirements for separate zones.
Thinking about
Yeah, just think about
Yeah.
it.
for another meeting.
for another time. And we kind of discussed that, how, industrial, commercial, and residential, kind of standards need to.
And if I could make one quick comment, the reason, and think about commercial zoning. So we had somebody come in and want to put in storage units in the commercial zone, which right now you can't. So that's why we're wondering about splitting commercial to C1, C2. C1 would be something potentially where it's just strictly retail. And then C2 could be retail and or some of these other things. Because we just rezoned all of Main Street for commercial 6 years ago. And we did that with the anticipation that as those homes and residential houses are being bought up, then we'd have retail space for retailers to come in. But if somebody bought that up and put a storage unit there that's absolutely zero tax base and some prime time commercial property, retail property. And so that's the thought behind that.
I've had that in mind too, let's change that.
Yeah. So those are some things to be considered in that regard as far as why we put that on the agenda.
I think Lance has his storage buildings under contract.
Where's that at?
All of his storage buildings in Ballard.
Oh, yeah.
Selling those,
Yeah,
Really?
extreme storage.
it was
Oh,
quite a pretty good price.
I bet.
And
I didn't know they were for sale.
didn't either, but I think they're under contract. What's the cost of a building lot in Roosevelt today, you think?
Home building lot?
You
I have no
I
idea.
didn't hear that
Depends
question.
on where.
40 or 50,000?
Yep, on the golf course is 60.
Well, there's 13 listed for their tour tomorrow. And they start at 80 and go to 120.
Oh my
Really?
goodness.
Is this some Great Hawk you're talking about?
But they're all owned by the same person.
Yeah.
I wonder who.
But that's what they are, 80 to 120.
You want to
Let's see what happens. I cannot
But-
believe.
But,
crazy.
you know, the cost, I mean,
Well, we're seeing a lot of teleworkers, right? And these people are moving in, they've got money. It's a whole new beast.
What I'm afraid of, what I'm afraid of is, you know, we say we want to improve our economy, we want to stabilize our economy, we want to bring, you know, economic opportunities in to keep our children here. I don't know how we're going to do that with the costs
right,
of our home. And it's not anything that we're doing, it's outside influence. Man, it's insane.
I just had a grandson who was an engineer in Utah County, just not long out of college, and he decided to move to Virginia. He moved back there and he bought a 2,800 square foot house with an unfinished basement on an acre of ground for $280.
That's a good price.
You can't get that here.
No,
Not,
no.
And the same thing in Moab though.
yeah.
Just on the news, the residents can't afford to live there anymore because all the outside influences is jacking everything up. And they're going, we can't afford to live there.
All their daytime workers have to live somewhere else.
John and I are kind of glad it went up in St. George, but
Yeah, I bet.
ours are worth 3 times what we paid for them 12 years ago.
Well, if you think about when I was getting married, this was 20 years ago, but when I got married, I remember looking at houses in the north end of town, you know, 600 north, around that area. And they were averaging $45,000 to $60,000. And 2 years later, 2 or 3 years later, they almost doubled in price.
Well, you know, in 1986, we were building and we had a foundation in and had a street ready to pave. And the market dropped so fast that we backed off of that, laid our crew off. And it was 5 or 6 years before we got back to that foundation. House prices dropped. By 1990, they were about 40% of what they were in 1986. And we lost 15% of the population of Duchesne County between 1986 and 1990.
You and I used to play in a foundation like that. I think that was the foundation. Was it down in Meadowbrook? That was more than 10 years.
That was the street and the foundation.
It's that 20 years.
Used to ride my motorbike in it all the time.
We hired our crew back that we laid off to, by 1990, 75% of all the sales that we made in our real estate office were foreclosures.
So in
Hope that
Fruitland,
isn't coming back.
Fruitland of all places, so they do everything in the county out there, 5-acre lots. And forever you've been able to get 5 acres out there for 20,000 maybe even, 10 to 20.
Yeah, cheap.
And I was out there the other day and there was two different Mercedes Benz parked there, four dudes in suits walking around. I was like, what in the world? I'm gonna go talk to these guys. So I pulled up there and they was looking at 20 different lots that this guy had developed or had for sale, and they was looking right about 60,000 a lot for each 5 acre lot. So that's the difference in Fruitland.
So the property up in Cedarview, and I'll make this quick. So I've been buying some property up in Cedarview, and the first property I bought was around 25 to 2,700 an acre, and this was only 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago at the most. And then I bought some more property for about 3,500 an acre, and then I heard property was going for around 5,000 an acre. And now, right next to my property, 14,500 an acre for farm.
Yep.
Farm in Cedarview.
And these guys, same thing. These guys from Fruitland, they were investors from Salt Lake
It's 3
buying, and they got buyers lined up from California that are paying cash for the lots.
I probably I get,
Are you getting all this on the minutes? These are very important.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that when we get the minutes for the next meeting, that this is all.
people are looking,
Like, well, wait, in the
looking on
foundation.
county in Roosevelt City, finding the owners of vacant property, and they send notice. I get probably 4 or 5 a month that say, we're interested in buying your property, you know, and some of them have offers, you know. It's
Yeah, I got one
stupid
today.
low offers.
20,000.
2,800 for 30 acres.
But some of them,
I got 20,000 for mine.
Yours is worth more than mine.
That's a good deal.
Okay, on that note. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Motion by Lynn, second by John, all in favor?
Hey,
Excellent. I think we're heading in the right direction.
I think so.
You're good.